The night is thick with cold, the kind that clings to skin like damp ash. A wind cuts across the valley, rattling the tall grass, bending the trees into groaning whispers. In a small clearing, lit only by flickering firelight, a group of humans huddles close. Their furs are worn, their hands are cracked, their food is scarce, but they've survived another day, and for now the fire holds back the dark. Except, it doesn't hold back everything. Beyond the light, eyes gleam, yellow, unblinking, low to the ground. Shapes move between the trees, quiet, watching, not quite close but not quite far enough either. The humans sense it. They've seen these shadows before. Not bears, not big cats. These are something else, wolves, and you might not survive this. So before you enjoy the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. Let's see who's watching and when. Now, turn up the volume, and together let's begin today's journey of exploration. They say the first relationship between humans and canines began with a look. But let's be honest, it probably started with a snarl. Tens of thousands of years ago, the wolves that roamed Ice Age Europe and Asia were not fluffy companions or loyal sidekicks. They were efficient, opportunistic predators, fast, intelligent, and perfectly capable of taking down prey far larger than themselves. And if a human strayed too far from the group, well, let's just say wolves didn't exactly have a no-contact policy. But here's the twist. These two apex predators, humans and wolves, weren't only competing. They were watching each other, tracking the same herds, following the same migration trails, sleeping near the same water sources. They were neighbors whether they liked it or not. And in the glow of the fire, something began to shift. First, the wolves stayed back, far back, close enough to smell the meat roasting on the flames, but not close enough to get a rock in the ribs. They were cautious yet curious, because unlike most animals, wolves didn't flee. They lingered, they learned, and humans noticed. Imagine the scene. A carcass is stripped by a hunting party. They leave the bones behind, cracked open for marrow, but still meaty in places. Hours later, wolves appear. They sniff, nudge, take the leftovers. It happens again and again. Pattern forms. The humans start recognizing individual wolves. The bold ones, the clever ones, the ones that keep a polite distance and don't growl too much. One night, a small wolf pup, separated from its pack, stumbles near the fire. It's starving, shivering, too weak to be threatening. Someone throws it a bone, not out of kindness but curiosity. The pup stays, for a while, then longer. It eats scraps, sleeps just beyond the warmth, doesn't bark, doesn't bite. Then one day it's gone. But the humans remember. It's moments like this that carve stories into memory. And here's a fun, historically accurate detail. The oldest known dog burial dates back over 14,000 years. In it, a human and a dog were buried together. The animal curled beside its owner like it belonged there. Not just tolerated, loved. But that comes later. For now, we're still in the early days, when firelight flickered on wary eyes, and peace was measured in footsteps, not words. The relationship between humans and wolves began with distance, but that distance was narrowing. It's important to understand that this wasn't a planned partnership. No one held a meeting around the fire and said, "All right, folks, let's domesticate some apex predators." This was slow, messy, sometimes bloody, but it worked because both species saw something useful in the other. For wolves, the benefits were obvious. Leftovers, warmth, a buffer between themselves and bigger threats. And maybe, just maybe, the strange two-legged creatures who tossed bones weren't as dangerous as they seemed. For humans, it started as an uneasy tolerance. But there were perks. Wolves were watchful. They howled at danger. They moved like ghosts in the dark. If a predator was nearby, wolves knew before humans did. That alone was worth the risk. And then, it happened. The first time a wolf warned a camp. Maybe it barked at a lurking bear. Maybe it growled when strangers approached. Either way, it didn't attack the humans. That moment stuck. Suddenly, the question wasn't, why is this wolf here? It was, what if it stays? Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Some members of the tribe probably hated the idea. You're feeding that thing? Are you insane? Others were curious. Maybe a child snuck the wolf scraps. Maybe the elderly found comfort in the quiet presence of another breathing soul near the fire. And let's not forget, wolves had personalities. Some were bold. Some were shy. Some were aggressive. But a few were different. Less fearful, more playful, more willing to follow than flee. These weren't full wolves anymore, not in behavior. They were something else. Proto-dogs, the genetic outliers, the strange misfits of the pack. These were the ones that stayed. And here's a lesser-known fact. Scientists believe that early domestication wasn't just about behavior. It was about appearance. Wolves that looked less threatening, rounder faces, floppy ears, lighter fur. were more likely to be tolerated by humans. Over time, those traits were passed down. Nature didn't just select for survival. It selected for cuteness. Go ahead and thank your ancestors for your Labrador's dopey smile. By now, the wolves outside the campfire weren't just threats. They were shadows of possibility. Some were still dangerous. Most were wild. But a few had crossed an invisible line. Not quite human, not quite wolf, but something entirely new. And the humans? They didn't fully understand it yet. But they were beginning to feel it. In a world where survival was uncertain and danger never slept, something had shifted. A silent alliance had begun. Not written in words or sealed in ritual, but in quiet glances across firelight, in the toss of a bone, in the gentle wag of a tail. And whether they knew it or not, both species had just taken the first step towards something that would outlast the Ice Age, the Stone Age, and every age after. Because once the eyes in the dark became eyes at your side, nothing would ever be the same again. It always began the same way. A group of hunters returns to camp at dusk, bones slung over their shoulders, meat steaming in raw crimson bundles. Behind them, a quiet procession. Shadows among shadows. Wolves, pacing just out of reach, never snarling, never lunging, just waiting. Every now and then, one would edge closer to the kill site. It would dart in, grab a scrap, then vanish. Most were chased off with shouts and rocks. A few stayed, undeterred. Hungrier, smarter, braver. These weren't the wolves of fairy tales. They didn't huff or puff or blow anyone's house down. But they did something far more clever. They learned to wait for humans to do the hard work. In those tense years between rivalry and relationship, wolves were opportunistic scavengers. No longer stalking prey side by side with humans. Not yet. They operated as shadows on the edge of human life, raiding food piles, trailing migrations, following blood trails left by human spears. Some scientists call it the dumpster dog phase of domestication. And yes, that's a little insulting. But the idea is sound. Canines that hung around human waste and refuse gradually evolved into something new. Less hostile, more adaptive. Because while aggression might win you one kill, patience could feed your pups for weeks. The big leap, however, wasn't just in canine behavior, it was in human perception. At first, wolves were pests, threats, competitors for food and territory. But as patterns formed, something shifted. Humans noticed that these scavengers weren't always dangerous. In fact, they seemed helpful. Think about it. A human camp deep in the forest. Night falls. A pack of wolves begins to circle, sniffing out scraps. Then one snarls, not at a human, but at something approaching. A bear, a rival tribe, a wildcat. Whatever it was, it turns away. And suddenly, the scavenger starts to look a lot like a guardian. It wasn't loyalty. Not yet. It was convenience. Mutual benefit. Wolves got food. Humans got early warning systems. No contracts. No trust falls. Just the slow, silent realization that maybe it was better to let a few of the quieter wolves stick around. Still, it wasn't a smooth transition. There were incidents. Children bitten. Meat stolen. Disagreements between tribe members. Some wanted to feed the wolves. Others wanted to feed the wolves to other wolves. But over time, a few patterns emerged. Certain wolves came back regularly. They stopped growling when approached. They wagged their tails. They lay down near fires but never crossed the invisible line into human space. These were the transitional figures, the in-betweeners. Not tame, not wild. Not quite pets, but no longer predators. Call them proto-dogs. Call them camp followers. Call them the ancestors of your neighbor's dachshund. Whatever you call them, they were here, and they weren't leaving. Here's a strange but telling detail. Some archaeological sites show a change in wolf tooth wear patterns. In wild wolves, molars and canines were down from gnawing bone and tearing flesh. But in certain specimens found near human settlements, the teeth show signs of softer diets, like cooked scraps, marrow-leached bones, or even plants. Translation: some wolves were eating like humans. Maybe not at the table, but definitely off the menu. This stage of the relationship was built on tolerance. But more than that, it was built on observation. Wolves were smart. They began to understand human rhythms. When the tribe left for a hunt, they followed from a distance. When the hunters returned, they reappeared. They learned not to lunge, not to bark, not to bare teeth unless absolutely necessary. In return, humans began to name them, not officially, of course, but through gestures, whistles, clicks. The one with the white tail, the one with the limp, the one that stole a hide and ran off like it was hosting its own fashion show. And here's where the real magic starts. The bond wasn't just practical. It was personal. Imagine a child leaving a bone out on purpose. A young hunter mimicking a wolf's howl and waiting for a response. A shaman throwing bones into the fire and reading the way the smoke curls, wondering if the wolves will answer. There's a reason nearly every ancient culture has wolf myths. Some feared them, some revered them, but none ignored them, and all the while something deeper was brewing, something genetic. Over generations, wolves that stayed near humans began to evolve. Not just behaviorally, but biologically. They became smaller. Their snouts shortened. Their ears shifted. Their stress responses dulled. Nature was rewriting the wolf, turning it into a new creature. Not better, not worse, just different. Tailored to a life lived in the flickering shadow of human fire. This wasn't full domestication, not yet. That would take thousands more years. But the groundwork had been laid, and while the rest of the world still saw danger in the darkness, a few human communities began to see something else. Potential. These scavengers were no longer just eating scraps. They were helping shape the rhythm of life. When they howled, humans listened. When they growled, humans checked their spears. And slowly, silently, a partnership began to take form. Not with collars, not with commands, but with scraps, and glances, and a quiet understanding that maybe, just maybe, they were better off together. The snow falls softly over the plain, muffling sound and softening shapes. A human bends over the remains of a kill, a reindeer, taken down with persistence and sharp bone-tipped spears. As the others begin the long, grunting task of butchering and packing meat for the walk home, one figure lingers behind, scanning the treeline. There, a low, familiar shape appears just beyond the scrub. A wolf. No, not quite a wolf. It's smaller than its cousins. Its tail isn't tucked. It isn't baring teeth. Instead, it crouches low, wagging gently. It whines. And then, with hesitant steps, it approaches the man. Not for a fight, for something else entirely. He tosses it a rib bone. The creature grabs it, retreats a few paces, and lies down to chew. Not in fear, but in comfort. That moment, it isn't just about a snack. It's the beginning of trust. By this point in the story, the uneasy scavenger stage is giving way to something different. Warmer. Stranger. Something neither species fully understands yet. The wolves, now several generations removed from their wilder ancestors, are behaving differently. They follow individual humans, not just the group. They begin to anticipate routines. Some even play, bowing and nipping at children's feet, mimicking behavior normally reserved for packmates. In short, they're bonding. This transformation didn't happen all at once. It wasn't like someone woke up and said, "Wow, Gary, your wolf just cuddled with the baby. Guess it's domesticated." No, it was a slow slide, creeping shift, but certain moments stood out. A young hunter finds a wolf pup with an injured leg, its mother nowhere in sight. He carries it back to camp in a pouch of fur. He feeds it scraps. It lives. It stays. It follows him everywhere, like a second shadow with a tail. A woman preparing food outside the shelter notices one of the camp wolves barking. Not aggressively, but warningly. Moments later, a bear appears in the trees. Thanks to the wolf, the camp is ready. Spears are raised. Fire is stoked. The bear backs off. Another tribe returns from a hunt, led home through dense fog by a dog that knows the trail better than they do. This isn't survival in spite of the wolves anymore. It's survival with them. Here's a fact to chew on. Pun intended. Some of the oldest known dog burials show signs of arthritis and worn-down teeth, suggesting that the animals lived long, protected lives under human care. In one famous case, a dog with advanced disease was clearly kept alive for years, fed, sheltered, maybe even loved. No longer just tools. These animals were companions. And now for a weird one. Studies of ancient dog poop, yes, that's a thing, reveal diets remarkably similar to those of humans: meat, roots, even grains. These dogs weren't just tagging along. They were sitting at the proverbial dinner table. As the emotional bond deepened, so did the practical partnership. Dogs began to assist in hunting, not in the complex, trained sense we know today, but in their own instinctive way. They could smell prey long before humans could. They could chase, harass, distract. Even when they failed, they flushed animals toward ambushes or helped corner them in narrow terrain. A good dog meant fewer failed hunts, and that meant life. And, of course, they helped with the cleanup. Nothing went to waste, but their real gift. Warning: in a world where sudden death could sprint at you on 4 legs or drop from a tree, having an early alert system with fur and fangs was priceless. Dogs barked when predators approached. They growled at unfamiliar footsteps. They became, quite literally, the night watch. Which brings us to the curious role of the campfire. In prehistoric life, fire wasn't just for cooking. It was for safety, warmth, storytelling, and ritual. And who curled closest to the flames? Not the tough warriors. Not the shamans. The dogs. Dogs became part of the emotional structure of the tribe. Their presence softened fear, soothed children, even helped mourners after loss. Their howls sometimes joined human songs at night, eerie harmonies between species who had, for reasons no one quite understood, chosen to walk together. And yes, jokes began to form. "He farts worse than the wolves do," someone mutters after a meal of spoiled mammoth meat. "At least the dog buries his." Little things, silly things. But that's how you know it's working. Here's the moment where things truly turn. Someone begins to name the dog. It may start as a whistle, a click, a strange sound mimicked by others. But soon, that sound brings the dog running. Not food, not fear. Recognition, that's not wild behavior. That's relationship. And through it all, a subtle revolution is unfolding. Humans are becoming emotionally attached to animals they once feared. Dogs are learning that humans aren't just providers, they're partners. And together, they're beginning to carve out a new kind of survival. One that isn't driven by dominance, but by mutualism. No contracts, no collars, just a shared path forward. So next time you look at your dog sleeping by your feet, dreaming about something probably involving meat or a very fast squirrel, remember this. Their ancestors didn't just sneak scraps. They earned trust, they protected, they warned. They followed us not because they were forced, but because, for reasons no one quite remembers, they wanted to. And that right there is the beginning of something sacred. The morning mist curls low along the earth, softening the outlines of trees, blurring movement into ghost shapes. A herd of elk grazes ahead, hooves crunching frostbitten grass. Hidden just beyond a ridge, a line of human hunters crouches low, breath steaming, fingers wrapped around spears. And then, without a sound, a dog darts from the side. It doesn't attack. It circles, cutting off escape. The herd spooks, but not in all directions. It flows exactly where the hunters want it to, toward the waiting spears. The kill is swift, efficient, controlled. This is no accident. This is cooperation. By now, the long dance between wolves and humans has shifted into something deeper. Not just tolerance, not even companionship, but collaboration. The first unspoken pact, and like most important human agreements, it probably involved meat, eye contact, and the occasional belly rub. What made this so revolutionary wasn't just that humans had animals around, it was how they worked together. The hunting process, once a chaotic pursuit of blood and exhaustion, began to resemble strategy. Dogs weren't just tagging along anymore. They were part of the plan. Some would flush prey out of hiding. Others would chase it into traps or bottlenecks. And some, especially the lighter, quicker ones, would nip at the heels of smaller animals, herding them with startling precision. Did early humans train them the way we train dogs today? Not exactly. There were no clickers, no reward charts, no little bags of treats clipped to a mammoth skin belt. But there was observation, reinforcement, repetition, and most importantly, connection. The dogs that worked well with humans got food, warmth, and protection. The ones that didn't, well, let's just say they probably didn't get as many leftovers. Here's a historically accurate insight. Skeletal remains from around 10,000 years ago show selective breeding. Dogs were beginning to diverge, not just from wolves, but from each other. Some were built for speed, others for endurance, some for sheer toughness. This wasn't nature's randomness anymore. This was guided evolution directed by human need. Yes, the age of custom canines had begun. And here's something weird. In several ancient sites, humans are buried with their dogs, but also with weapons. And not just any weapons, the kinds used in team hunting. Composite spears, throwing sticks, even early atlatls. This suggests that dogs weren't just pets, they were partners in the hunt, honored as warriors in their own right. The mutual advantages were clear. Humans brought brains, weapons, and fire. Dogs brought speed, senses, and silent pursuit. Together, they formed a unit far more dangerous than either species alone. The prey never stood a chance, but it went beyond the hunt. Dogs began to guard camps more actively, barking at strangers, alerting to predators, circling boundaries like living sentries. At night, when the fire burned low and the shadows crept in, a single growl from a dog might save a dozen lives. And this had social effects too. Dogs, once strays and scavengers, became symbols. A successful hunter with a clever dog was admired. A child raised alongside a pup learned empathy, responsibility, and how to throw a stick even if the dog didn't always bring it back. A shaman might claim a special dog as a spiritual companion, interpreting its dreams or even mimicking its howls in ritual. Yes, ritual. Some ancient cultures believed that dogs could see into the spirit world, guide souls to the afterlife, or warn of unseen forces. In these early myths, the dog is no longer just muscle and fur. It's a bridge. And let's not forget the jokes. You trust that dog more than you trust your brother. Someone teases as a man shares his last strip of dried meat with a floppy-eared companion. That's because the dog hasn't stolen my shoes. He grumbles, prompting laughter. Because where there is shared life, there is humor. And the presence of dogs changed not only how humans hunted, but how they lived. One fun detail. Early humans began naming dogs differently than they named each other. Shorter sounds, sharper syllables. Not formal names, but functional ones, perhaps related to speed, color, or a unique behavior. Flick, whine, scratch, sharp ear. These weren't just labels. They were the beginning of language adapting to accommodate another species. And if that doesn't blow your mind just a little, check your pulse. By this point, dogs weren't merely useful, they were indispensable. Camps were chosen with their safety in mind. Routes were planned around their stamina. And as humans moved into colder climates, dogs pulled sleds, warmed sleeping hides, and acted as early warning systems in the snow. They didn't just follow humans. They enabled them. Together, they explored new lands, hunted new prey, faced new dangers. The bond deepened not by force, but by function. Because the dog wasn't just a creature of instinct anymore. It was a creature of loyalty. Not loyalty born of fear, but of time, trust, and shared survival. So next time you see a dog chasing a squirrel with unnecessary enthusiasm, remember this. Its ancestors once chased elk into the waiting spears of hunters. And those hunters? They didn't just see a clever animal. They saw something more. Partner. A protector. A friend. Because long before collars and chew toys, before leashes and laser pointers, there was only the open world. And two species who decided, somehow, that they were better off together. It is night again. The sky spills stars across the black canvas overhead, and the wind sighs through the trees like an ancient lullaby. A small human camp nestles in a hollow between hills, quiet save for the occasional crackle of firewood. Around the flames, humans sleep in clusters, curled beneath hides, their bellies full, their dreams peaceful. But not all of them sleep. At the camp's edge, a dog sits alert, not moving, not growling, just listening. Every now and then it turns its head toward the forest, nose twitching, ears perked. Not out of fear, out of duty. This is no wild animal anymore. No scavenger, no shadow. This is something different. This is family. By the time humans crossed into new continents, scaled unfamiliar mountains, and braved frozen tundras, dogs were no longer just useful, they were everywhere. In every migration route, in every cave, in every traveling band of hunter-gatherers, evidence of canines walks beside the footprints of humans. Always close. Never far behind. The partnership, by now, is no longer a test. It's a given. And with that comes evolution, not just physical but emotional. Dogs are not simply adapted to human behavior. They are tuned to it. A glance, a shift in tone, a lifted eyebrow. Dogs respond in ways no other animal does. You might know this from your own life, the way a dog seems to know when you're sad. The way it watches your hands as you speak. That tilt of the head when it doesn't understand your words but knows you're trying. That behavior? It's not modern. It began here, thousands of years ago, by firelight. And speaking of strange behaviors, did you know that dogs are one of the few animals that follow the direction of a human point? Not just your eyes, but your finger. Try that with a cat and you'll be ignored like yesterday's news. But dogs, they evolved to pay attention, to align themselves with our intention. Because somewhere deep in that ancient brain, a dog once figured out, this human is trying to tell me something. It's not just intelligence, it's connection. And humans, for their part, changed too. The more time we spent with dogs, the more emotionally responsive we became to them. Mirror neurons, bonding hormones. Even our brain chemistry started to reinforce the partnership. Petting a dog reduces stress. Sharing food with one triggers feelings of joy. Losing one brings grief as real as losing a person. This wasn't just cohabitation. This was integration. We adapted to each other. We built lives around each other. And in doing so, we created something no other species on Earth had done before, a cross-species friendship. Let's take a moment to imagine an early human traveling across a dangerous, unfamiliar landscape. Maybe they're scouting new territory, maybe they're on a vision quest, maybe they've just had a fight with their mother-in-law and need some space. Who's with them? Not a fellow hunter. Not a child. Not a spouse. It's the dog. And when they stop for the night, they share food. When they dream, the dog dreams too. And if danger approaches in the dark, that dog stands up, growling softly, and the human sleeps on, safe in a world where few things ever felt safe. That's more than utility. That's love. And yes, humans began to formalize this bond. Dogs appear in ancient carvings, mythologies, even burial rites. In some early European sites, dogs were buried with beads, bones, and symbols. In parts of Asia, dogs were given their own resting places. In Native American cultures, they were sung about in sacred stories. The relationship had moved from the realm of survival into the realm of culture. They had earned their place not just by the fire, but in the human heart. And as humans spread to every corner of the globe, through forests, over mountains, across deserts and ice, dogs followed. Some pulled sleds in the Arctic. Others helped herd animals on grassy plains. Some tracked prey through jungles. Others simply stood watch as babies slept, and all of them, no matter where they lived, carried with them the echoes of those first encounters. The hungry eyes in the dark, the stolen bones, the cautious sniff, the gentle wag. Of course, not every moment was perfect. There were fights. There were failures. Not every dog was loyal and not every human was kind. But somehow, through fire and famine, through storms and migrations, through changes in climate and culture, the bond held. It still holds. Maybe the most telling proof is this. The very word dog is among the first words children learn in any language. Not strategy, not commerce, not real estate tax. Dog. Because from the very beginning, dogs were never just background players in the human story. They were co-authors. They helped write the chapters of survival, protection, joy, and loyalty. They reminded us what trust looks like, what silence can say, what it means to guard without asking, to follow without demanding, to love without condition. So as you look down today at the dog lying beside your bed, or snoozing on your sofa, or chewing your favorite shoe into oblivion, remember this. That creature carries 30,000 years of history in its bones. It is the descendant of scavengers and sentinels. of wild beasts who traded the darkness for the warmth of human fire, of quiet friends who gave warning barks, helped feed a hungry tribe, and curled against our backs in the bitter cold. They are not pets, they are partners. And long before we tamed the world, long before we planted crops or built cities or invented bedtime snacks, we had dogs. And thank the stars, we still do.